My 11-year-old was branded a thief for taking talent show equipment, but his bold act exposed a hidden pay-to-play scheme, furious parents, news cameras, and even an arson attempt that turned our school into the center of a corruption investigation no one expected. My 11-year-old son got suspended for stealing $3,000 worth of donated equipment meant for the talent show, and I've never been prouder. The call came while I was in a meeting with my boss about budget cuts. The principal's voice was shaking with fury. "Your son has taken property that doesn't belong to him. The police are here." My hands trembled as I drove to the school. Tanner had never been in trouble before. He was the kid who returned extra change at the cafeteria. The parking lot was packed with branded cars. Apparently, a local tech company had donated brand new sound equipment for the talent show, and now it was missing. When I found Tanner sitting outside the principal's office, he wasn't crying. He was typing something on his phone with intense focus. "Mom, before they come out, you need to know something," he said quietly. "I did take the equipment, but look at this." He showed me his phone. It was a spreadsheet showing talent show participants sorted into 2 columns: premium package, $500, and basic package, free. "What is this?" I asked. Kids whose parents paid got wireless mics, spotlight time, and prime performance slots. Kids who couldn't pay got broken mics from 1995 and had to perform while people were still arriving. The principal's door burst open. Mr. Charlson, the PTA president, stormed out with his wife. "Your son is a thief. My daughter's performance is ruined because of him." The principal, Ms. Finch, looked exhausted. "Tanner admitted to taking the new equipment. He needs to return it immediately or we're pressing charges." "Where is it, Tanner?" I asked. He stood up slowly. "I gave it to the kids who couldn't afford the premium package. Kaylee has the good mic now. Her dad just lost his job, but she's been practicing for months. The Graham twins have proper speakers for their violin duet. And Joey," he paused, looking directly at Mr. Charlson. "Joey finally has equipment that doesn't cut out every time he hits a high note." Mrs. Charlson's face went red. "Those children didn't pay for premium access." The room went silent. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Pay?" I asked slowly. "This is a public school talent show." Ms. Finch shifted uncomfortably. "The PTA implemented a voluntary donation system to improve the experience." "Voluntary?" Tanner pulled out his phone. "Then why did Joey's mom get this text from Mrs. Charlson?" He read aloud. "If you can't commit to the premium package, perhaps Joey should consider a different activity. We want all our performers to have the best experience." Mrs. Charlson's face went white. "That was taken out of context? What about this one to Kaylee's dad?" Tanner swiped. "Unfortunately, the 8 p.m. slots are filling up fast with our supporting families, but 4 p.m. is wide open. Nobody's even there at 4 p.m. Mr. Harrison stepped forward. "Where did you get private messages?" "From the kids whose parents were being threatened and guilt-tripped," Tanner said. "They formed a group chat. There's 43 kids in it." "You little—" Mr. Charlson started forward but stopped when he saw what it looked like. The music teacher, Mr. Kim, appeared in the doorway, pale-faced. "Principal Finch, we have a problem. 3 news stations just arrived. Someone sent them documentation about the pay-to-play scheme. They're calling it talent show bribery scandal. Even worse, other parents started flooding the hallway, phones out, shouting questions at this very moment." Ms. Finch looked like she might faint. "Everyone please calm down." "Calm down?" A dad pushed through the crowd. "You let them turn a children's talent show into an auction. My kid practiced for 3 months only to be told the 8 p.m. slot was reserved for sponsors." Tanner tugged my sleeve. "Mom, there's more." He showed me another video on his phone. It was Mr. Charlson in what looked like the school storage room, putting aside boxes labeled, "New Equipment. Donated by Tech Corp." "That's from last week," Tanner whispered, before they even announced the donation. He was already dividing it up based on his list. I stood up. "Mr. Charlson, did you take possession of donated equipment before it was officially given to the school?" His lawyer instincts kicked in. "I was helping with logistics." "Were you planning to return the unused premium equipment after the show?" I asked louder, so everyone could hear. "Or was it going to end up in certain PTA members' homes?" The crowd pressed closer. Someone shouted, "Is that why the Charlson kid has the same mic system at home? I saw it on her Instagram." Mrs. Charlson tried to pull her husband away, but parents blocked their path. Ms. Finch was on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone about crisis management and legal liability. That's when the fire alarm went off. In the chaos of evacuation, Tanner grabbed my hand. "Mom, that's not a drill. Look, through the window, we could see smoke coming from the auditorium." The same auditorium where all the premium equipment had been set up for tonight's show. As we rushed outside with everyone else, Tanner said quietly, "Mom, I need to tell you something else. I wasn't the only kid who knew about this. We formed a group in taking the equipment. That was just plan A. I stared at him. What was plan B? He looked me straight in the eyes and said, Plan B was about making sure the evidence couldn't disappear if the equipment got confiscated. Before I could ask what that meant, I noticed several kids in the crowd filming everything on their phones with unusual coordination. They weren't just randomly recording like most people would during drama. They were positioned at different angles, making sure to capture every face, every reaction, every word being said. The fire truck screamed into the parking lot and firefighters jumped out, running toward the building with their heavy gear clanking. The fire chief, a tall man with gray hair, pushed through the crowd and started barking orders to his team. Within minutes, they had the area cordoned off with yellow tape and nobody was allowed near the auditorium entrance. The chief came back out after his initial check, his face serious as he announced that the auditorium was too dangerous to enter and would be sealed for investigation. Mr. Charleson's face went pale when he heard this, and I saw him exchange a worried look with his wife. All that premium equipment they'd set up for tonight's show was now locked inside a crime scene. Ms. Finch tried to dismiss everyone, waving her hands and telling parents to go home. But Calvin Harmon from Channel 7 was already there with his camera crew, pushing through the crowd with his microphone out. He started interviewing parents right there on the spot, asking about the pay-to-play scheme. Several parents eagerly shared their stories, one mom talking about how she was told her daughter's dance routine would be cut short if she didn't pay, another dad explaining how his son was moved to the worst time slot after they refused to donate. The cameras caught it all and more news vans were pulling up every minute. Tanner tugged my sleeve and quietly told me the group had made copies of everything, receipts, emails, even security footage someone's parent who worked night shift had saved from the school cameras. The 43 kids weren't just complaining in their group chat, they'd been building a case for weeks, gathering evidence and documenting everything. He showed me a shared drive on his phone with folders labeled by date, each one full of screenshots and videos. Graham Reeves, the fire investigator, emerged from his preliminary check of the building, pulling off his helmet and wiping sweat from his forehead. He announced to the growing crowd that he'd found evidence of electrical tampering in the auditorium's main panel. Someone had deliberately overloaded the circuits, and he was calling in the police forensics team to process the scene. The murmur through the crowd grew louder as parents realized this wasn't just an accident. Mr. Charleson immediately stepped forward, pointing at Tanner and the other kids who were still filming, accusing them of arson to destroy evidence. His face was red and his voice shook with anger as he claimed the kids had set the fire to cover up their theft. I stepped forward and reminded everyone that my son was with me in the principal's office when the fire started, along with several witnesses, including Miss Finch herself. The principal nodded reluctantly, confirming that Tanner had been in her office the entire time. More parents kept arriving as word spread through social media about what was happening at the school. Cars filled the street and people abandoned their vehicles wherever they could find space, running toward the crowd with their phones out. Noelle Warner pushed through the group, and when she heard about the pay-to-play scheme, she started crying right there in front of everyone. She'd lost her house last month and was living with her sister, and now she was learning that her daughter had been excluded from the good time slots because they couldn't afford to pay. Other parents started comforting her, sharing their own stories of financial pressure and threats from the PTA board. A detective arrived in an unmarked car, stepping out with a notebook already in his hand. He went straight to Graham Reeves and started taking his statement about the electrical tampering. Graham told him the tampering appeared to have been done by someone familiar with the building's electrical system, someone who knew exactly which circuits to overload to cause maximum damage without triggering the main breakers too quickly. The detective wrote everything down, occasionally glancing over at the Charlesons who were standing apart from the crowd, whispering urgently to each other. Dante Delgado, the superintendent, pulled up in his car and practically ran from the parking lot, his tie flapping as he pushed through the crowd. I wonder what's really going through Tanner's mind right now. 11 years old and he's been running some kind of secret operation with 43 other kids? That's quite the organized effort. He took one look at the scene, the news cameras, the crying parents, the sealed auditorium, and immediately took control. He announced in a loud, clear voice that all PTA financial records would be frozen, pending a full audit of the talent show funds. Any money collected from parents would be thoroughly investigated, and he was calling an emergency school board meeting for that evening. Mrs. Charleson grabbed her husband's arm and tried to pull him toward their car, but parents had formed a circle around them, not threatening, but definitely not letting them leave easily. The detective had to intervene, pushing through the crowd to reach them, telling the Charlesons they needed to stay for questioning about the missing donation documentation. He specifically mentioned that they'd need to explain why equipment that was supposed to be donated to the school had been divided up before it was even officially received. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to hear their answer, but the Charlesons just stood there in silence, their lawyer instincts finally kicking in enough to keep their mouths shut. Joey's mom pushed through the crowd, holding her phone up high like she was showing off a winning lottery ticket. She scrolled through message after message while other parents crowded around to look at the screen. The detective who'd been standing near the fire trucks walked over and started taking photos of each text with his own phone. Mr. Charleson's face went from red to white as he pulled out his phone and started typing frantically. The janitor, old Mr. Henderson, who'd worked at the school for 20 years, walked right up to the detective and tapped him on the shoulder. He told him about seeing Mr. Charleson in the electrical room last Thursday afternoon with a toolbox, said he figured it was PTA stuff since Charleson had keys to everything. The detective's eyebrows went up as he started writing in his notebook. Tanner tugged on my sleeve again and showed me his phone screen with dates going back 3 weeks. The kids had screenshots of every single payment demand, every threat, every time someone got moved to a worse time slot. They'd been planning this whole thing since the first kid got told their act wasn't good enough for prime time unless their parents paid up. A news van with Channel 7 painted on the side screeched into the parking lot and Calvin Harmon jumped out with a microphone already in his hand. He went live right there on the sidewalk talking about corruption at our elementary school while parents behind him waved and shouted things about the payment scheme. 2 more news vans pulled up within minutes and suddenly we had reporters everywhere asking parents for interviews. Ms. Finch tried to tell everyone she had no idea about any payment requirements, but Mr. Kim and 3 other teachers all looked at each other like they were having a Mr. Kim finally spoke up about how he'd been told to give the good practice rooms only to kids whose parents had paid. He said Ms. Finch herself had given him the list. The fire investigator came back from the auditorium carrying an iPad with photos on it. He showed the detective pictures of the electrical panel with clear tool marks on the wires. Someone had definitely cut them on purpose, probably last night or early this morning based on how clean the cuts were. My stomach dropped as I realized what this meant. Someone had tried to burn down the whole auditorium to destroy evidence. If there had been kids practicing in there, they could have been hurt or worse. I pulled Tanner closer to me and started looking around at all the faces in the crowd, wondering who would do something like that. A black SUV pulled up and Reed Muller from the school board stepped out looking like he'd been dragged out of bed. He announced right there in front of everyone that there would be an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 9, said he'd been getting calls all afternoon from angry parents and wanted answers about this payment system nobody had approved. The detective walked over to Mr. Charleson and asked him about his access to the electrical room. Charleson said lots of people had keys, but Mr. Henderson shook his head and said only 3 people had that specific key: the principal, the head custodian, and Mr. Charleson as PTA president. Parents started telling their stories right there in the parking lot. One dad talked about how his daughter was told her dance wasn't premium quality after they couldn't pay the $500. Another mom said her son got moved from 8 p.m. to 4:30 after she said she couldn't afford the package. A grandmother started crying as she told everyone how her granddaughter had been practicing for months, only to be told she'd have to use the broken microphone because they were on a fixed income. The detective kept writing everything down while the news cameras rolled. More parents kept showing up as word spread through social media. Kids were posting videos on TikTok and Instagram showing the difference between the premium equipment and the broken stuff. One video showed a kid trying to sing into a mic that cut out every 3 seconds. Another showed the Graham twins trying to play their violins through speakers that made everything sound like it was underwater. Mr. Charleson tried to leave, but parents had formed a circle around him and his wife, not threatening them or anything, just standing there with their phones out recording everything. Someone asked him where the rest of the donated equipment was supposed to go after the talent show. He didn't answer, but his wife's face gave it away when she glanced at their Mercedes in the parking lot. The detective noticed too and walked over to look through the back window. You could see boxes in there with the TechCorp logo on them, the same logo that was on the donation paperwork. Tanner showed me another message on his phone from the group chat. Apparently 12 kids had been recording everything for weeks. They had video of Mr. Charleson loading equipment into his car last week. They had recordings of parents being told their kids weren't good enough. They even had a video of Mrs. Charleson telling a mom that maybe public school wasn't the right fit if she couldn't support the enrichment programs. The fire chief came over and told Miss Advinch the auditorium was off limits until they finished their investigation. That meant the talent show was officially canceled, at least in its current form. Some parents started cheering when they heard that. Others looked disappointed because their kids had worked so hard. But then something amazing happened that I'll never forget. One of the kids from the basic package group started singing without any mic at all. Then another joined in, and another, until 40 kids were standing together in the parking lot singing the same song they'd been practicing for months. Parents started recording on their phones while the premium package kids stood there looking confused about what to do. Tanner's phone buzzed and he showed me the screen where a text said the kids had been sharing screenshots and recordings with someone's. The message said this attorney was offering free help to any family who'd been pushed out of good performance slots because they couldn't pay. More parents were gathering around us now, some crying as they watched their kids singing together without any equipment at all. The superintendent's car pulled up and she got out looking like she'd been dragged from bed, her hair still messy and wearing sweatpants under her coat. She walked straight to Miss Finch and they talked quietly for a minute before she turned to face all of us parents. She announced the talent show was canceled completely until they could figure out what had happened with the donations and the payment system. Mr. Charlson started shouting about how this was ridiculous and the show must go on, but the superintendent cut him off and reminded him that he was now part of an investigation. The sun was starting to set and nobody was leaving even though the fire department had cleared most of the building. Someone's dad came back with a huge box of coffee from the gas station and another mom brought blankets from her car. People were setting up lawn chairs and camping out right there in the parking lot like they weren't going anywhere until someone explained how this happened. The school counselor pulled up in her minivan and started setting up a table with juice boxes and crackers for the kids who were getting tired and upset. She told parents she was opening the library as a quiet space where kids could talk about how they felt about adults they trusted lying to them. I walked closer to where two school board members were standing by their cars and heard one telling the other that Mr. Charlson had worked at another district before this one. She said there were problems there too with money going missing from fundraisers, but he left before anyone could prove anything. A detective arrived with two other officers and announced they had a warrant to take all the computers and files from the PTA office. Mrs. Charlson started screaming about privacy and rights, but the detective showed her the paper signed by a judge. The local pizza place owner pulled up with 10 pizzas and started handing out slices to families. Then the Chinese restaurant brought egg rolls and soon half the restaurants in town were dropping off food. People were hugging and sharing stories about how their kids had been treated differently based on whether they paid. Tanner pulled on my sleeve and whispered he was scared about getting expelled for taking the equipment, but he didn't regret doing it. I told him that sometimes doing what's right means facing consequences, but I'd be with him no matter what happened. The fire chief came back outside and told everyone the whole building was safe except the auditorium, which had smoke damage and would stay closed for the investigation. Pizza delivery guy shows up with 10 free pizzas while cops are literally seizing computers for evidence. Talk about reading the room perfectly. This parking lot just became the most wholesome crime scene ever, complete with juice boxes and egg rolls. School could open tomorrow, but the talent show stage was now considered a crime scene, which made some parents actually applaud. Then Mr. Harrison, who'd been standing with the Charlsons all night, walked over to the superintendent and said loud enough for everyone to hear that he knew about the payment scheme. He said he thought it was legal since it was called donations, but he saw lists at PTA meetings showing which kids got better treatment based on payments. Mrs. Charlson looked at him like he'd stabbed her in the back while he kept talking about emails and meetings where they discussed keeping non-paying families in bad time slots. The detective immediately walked over to Mr. Harrison and asked if he'd be willing to make an official statement about what he knew. More parents started coming forward saying they had texts and emails about being pressured to pay for their kids to get fair treatment. The superintendent announced that an emergency school board meeting would happen tomorrow and all parents were invited to attend and share their experiences. Ms. Finch looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground as parents stared at her with anger and disappointment. Some of the premium package parents were starting to realize their kids had gotten advantages that weren't fair, and a few looked genuinely upset about it. The crowd kept growing as more people heard what was happening and came to support the families who'd been discriminated against. Tanner showed me his phone again, where the group chat had grown to over 60 kids, all sharing their stories about the talent show. One message said a local news crew was on the way after someone's older sister who worked at the station heard about everything. I looked around at all these families standing together and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, like maybe things could actually change. The Charlsons were trying to leave, but their car was blocked in by all the other vehicles and nobody seemed interested in moving for them. That's when a group of teachers pushed through the crowd toward Miss Finch, who was standing near the main entrance looking completely lost. Mr. Kim had about 8 other teachers with him, all holding folders and looking really serious. They walked right up to her and Mr. Kim handed her a piece of paper while the other teachers stood behind him with their arms crossed. Ms. Finch's face went from confused to shocked as she read it, her hands starting to shake. The paper was a vote of no confidence signed by 32 teachers who said they were done being forced to treat kids differently based on their parents' bank accounts. Before she could even respond, a black SUV pulled up and the superintendent stepped out, his face looking like thunder. He walked straight to Ms. Finch and told her she was on administrative leave starting right now and she needed to hand over her keys and leave the property immediately. Ms. Finch started crying as she pulled her keys from her pocket, dropping them twice before managing to hand them over. The superintendent announced to everyone that an interim principal would start tomorrow while they investigated everything that had happened. Parents started cheering and some of the teachers actually hugged each other like they'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. Over by the bike racks, I saw a woman I recognized from PTA meetings, Noelle Warner, standing on a bench and shouting that they needed to organize. She was holding up her phone and telling everyone to text their number to her so she could set up a phone tree to make sure every family knew their rights. Even though her clothes were worn and I knew she'd been struggling since her divorce, she looked more alive than I'd seen her in months. She kept saying this fight gave her something to focus on, something that mattered more than her own problems. The crowd around her grew as more parents pulled out their phones and started texting. That's when a detective approached me and Tanner, showing his badge and asking if we could talk somewhere quieter. We followed him to an empty classroom where he set up a recorder and asked Tanner to explain everything from the beginning. My son pulled out a thick folder from his backpack and started laying out papers on the desk like he was presenting a case. There were screenshots, spreadsheets, emails, even photos of equipment being moved around after hours. The detective's eyebrows went up as he flipped through page after page, occasionally asking Tanner how he got certain pieces of information. Tanner explained about the group chat with 43 kids who'd been pushed aside, how they'd all shared what they'd seen and heard over the past few months. The detective looked at me and said, Tanner wouldn't face any charges for redistributing the equipment since it was donated for all students to use. He actually seemed impressed by how organized and thorough my 11-year-old had been in documenting everything. While we were in that classroom, my phone started blowing up with news alerts about our school. Apparently someone had contacted the state education department, and they were already announcing an investigation into whether federal funds meant for all students had been misused. The tech company that donated the equipment had released a statement within hours, saying they were horrified to learn their donation had been corrupted. They promised all future donations would go directly to individual classrooms and teachers, completely bypassing any administrative channels. Through the classroom window, I could see Mr. Ed Charleson's lawyer had arrived, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who was trying to control the narrative. He stood on the school steps, telling anyone who would listen that this was all a misunderstanding about voluntary donations and community support. The crowd's response was immediate and angry, with parents shouting about the emails they'd received and the pressure they'd felt. Someone threw a juice box that splattered near his feet, making him step back quickly. The lawyer tried to keep talking, but more parents pressed forward, drowning him out with their stories about being told their kids weren't good enough without payment. 3 days later, things got even worse for the Charlesons when forensic accountants the school board hired found something shocking in the PTA financial records. There were $15,000 in withdrawals that couldn't be explained by any legitimate PTA activities or purchases. The money trail led to some interesting places like a family vacation labeled as a leadership conference, and new laptops for PTA board members' kids listed as administrative equipment. When I finally went back to work, my boss was waiting in my office with a stern look on her face. She started to lecture me about missing the important budget meeting, but then her expression softened when she pulled up the news on her tablet. The story had gone viral with headlines about talent show corruption and 11-year-old expose's school scandal appearing on major news sites. She told me to take whatever time I needed to handle the situation, and even offered to adjust my schedule so I could attend any meetings or hearings. That evening, the school board held an emergency meeting in the gymnasium because so many parents wanted to attend that the regular boardroom couldn't hold everyone. Reed Muller, the board president, opened the meeting by standing at the microphone and apologizing for the board's complete failure to provide proper oversight. His voice cracked when he talked about how they'd trusted the wrong people and let down the entire school community. The gymnasium was packed with hundreds of parents, many holding signs demanding accountability and transparency in the school operations going forward. One by one, parents started lining up at the microphone to tell their stories about how their kids had been hurt by the payment system. A mom in scrubs explained how her daughter practiced piano for 6 months, only to be told the good time slots were full unless she could donate $500. A dad holding a toddler talked about his older son quitting drama club after being assigned a non-speaking role, while kids whose parents paid got lead parts. Another parent showed printed emails from PTA members suggesting their child might be happier in a different activity if they couldn't support the program financially. Then Kaylee walked up to the microphone with a piece of paper shaking in her hands. She read slowly about how she felt worthless when other kids got better equipment just because their parents had more money, how she cried after every practice watching kids with worse skills get featured spots, and how she almost quit singing completely until Tanner gave her the good microphone. Her voice broke when she said she thought maybe she just wasn't good enough until she learned it was never about talent at all. The board members looked sick as more parents kept coming forward with similar stories. After 2 hours of testimonies, Reed called for a vote on immediate policy changes. The board voted 7-0 to ban all payment tiers for any school activities effective immediately. They also voted to create an equity committee with 5 parent representatives who would review every single fundraising activity and donation policy going forward. The committee would have full access to all financial records and the power to veto any program that created unfair advantages. 3 days later, I got a call from the district attorney's office asking me to bring Tanner in for an interview. The detective explained that based on the evidence Tanner had collected and the forensic audit findings, they were filing criminal charges against Mr. and Mrs. Charleson for embezzlement and conspiracy to commit fraud. The Charlesons turned themselves in that afternoon with their lawyer, posting $50,000 bail each but getting hit with restraining orders preventing them from going near any school property or contacting any of the witness families. Mr. Harrison switching sides after standing with the Charlesons all night makes me wonder what finally pushed him over the edge, guilty conscience or self-preservation. The way he's suddenly remembering all these details about payment lists and meetings seems awfully convenient timing. The judge made it clear that any violation would mean immediate jail time. When Tanner went back to the school the following Monday, the reactions were all over the place. Some kids treated him like a hero, high-fiving him in the halls and thanking him for exposing the truth. But other kids whose parents had been friends with the Charlesons or had benefited from the payment system gave him cold looks or turned away when he walked by. A few even bumped into him on purpose or knocked his books off his desk. Tanner handled it all without complaining, just picking up his stuff and moving on without saying anything back. The new interim principal, brought in from another district, started making changes right away. She posted every single donation on a public board in the main hallway with exactly where the money went. She created new policies requiring equal access to all equipment and resources regardless of any donations. She also started these restorative justice circles where kids could talk about how the whole mess had affected them. Some kids admitted they felt guilty about getting advantages they didn't earn, while others talked about feeling angry and left out. The circles helped everyone start to heal and understand each other better. About a month later, the complete forensic audit report came out and it was worse than anyone expected. The investigation found that several other PTA board members had been getting kickbacks from vendors who got exclusive contracts for school events. One member's husband owned the catering company that charged 3 times market rate for every PTA event. Another member's sister ran the printing company that handled all school materials at inflated prices. The whole thing was a web of people enriching themselves using school funds. The district responded by implementing strict new policies requiring 3 signatures for any expense over $500 and full public disclosure of all contracts and spending. They also mandated that every parent volunteer in any leadership position had to complete ethics training and sign conflict of interest forms. Any violation would result in immediate removal and potential criminal investigation. Meanwhile, Ms. Finch quietly negotiated her own fate with the district. About 2 months after everything exploded, news came out that she had reached a settlement where she would resign permanently and surrender her administrative license in exchange for no admission of wrongdoing and no criminal charges. A lot of parents were furious that she was getting off so easy, but the district's lawyer explained that proving criminal intent would be nearly impossible since she could claim she didn't know about the payment scheme details. The Charlesons' criminal trial started 3 months later with Tanner as the prosecution's star witness. He sat in that witness chair for 2 hours going through every piece of evidence he had collected, explaining how he had documented the payment tiers, recorded conversations, and tracked where the donated equipment went. The Charlesons' expensive lawyer tried everything to shake him, suggesting he misunderstood things or that he had stolen private information illegally, but Tanner stayed calm and just kept referring back to the evidence. When the lawyer asked if Tanner had a grudge against the Charlesons, Tanner simply said he just wanted every kid to have a fair chance. After our story hit the state news, other districts started looking into their own PTA finances and school fundraising practices. Within 2 months, 3 more pay-to-play schemes got exposed at schools across the state. One school had been charging for better seats at graduation, another was selling spots on academic competition teams, and a third had parents bidding on class placement with favorite teachers. It turned out this problem was way bigger than just our school, and Tanner's actions had started a wave of investigations that kept spreading. The kids who'd been part of the original group chat started meeting every Thursday after school in Mr. Kim's music room. They called themselves the Student Voice Committee, and within 2 weeks, they had 47 members, including kids from every grade. The principal who'd replaced Ms. Finch actually gave them an official charter and assigned 2 teachers as sponsors. They set up a suggestion box outside the main office and started reviewing every policy that affected students. Their first victory came when they got the school to change the lunch schedule, so kids actually had time to eat instead of spending 20 minutes in line. Then they tackled the dress code that somehow only ever seemed to punish girls and got it rewritten to be actually fair. The PTA tried to block them at first, but after everything that happened with the Charlesons, nobody wanted to look like they were against student participation. 3 weeks into the new semester, I got a call from someone on the school board, asking if I'd consider running for an open seat. Apparently, several parents had suggested my name after seeing how I'd handled the talent show situation. I wasn't sure at first because I'd never done anything political, but Tanner sat me down with a laptop and showed me all the board meeting minutes from the past year. Half the decisions they made affected kids directly, but there wasn't a single parent on the board who had a kid currently in the system. That night, I filled out the paperwork to run on a platform of transparency and making sure parents and students actually had a voice. The campaign was weird because everywhere I went, people already knew who I was from the news coverage. Some parents crossed the street to avoid me, but others would stop me in the grocery store to thank me for exposing what had been going on. The Charlesons' trial started in March and lasted 3 weeks. They'd been charged with embezzlement, conspiracy, and fraud related to misusing school funds and donated equipment. Every day, there were new revelations about how deep the corruption went. They'd been skimming from fundraisers for 2 years and keeping 2 sets of books for PTA finances. The prosecutor had boxes of evidence, including emails where Mrs. Charleson literally wrote, "Make sure only our kids get the good stuff," about donated supplies. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted. They got 18 months probation, 300 hours of community service, and had to pay back $37,000 they'd stolen over the years. Their lawyer tried to argue for leniency, but the judge said abuse of position involving children's education was particularly serious. After all the drama, the school decided to completely restart the talent show with new rules. No payment tiers, no premium packages, no reserved time slots. Every kid who wanted to perform got their name put in a hat for random selection of performance order. The whole community pitched in to make it special without making it unfair. Local businesses donated snacks for everyone, not just certain families. Parents volunteered to help with lighting and sound for all performers equally. The show itself was amazing because kids who'd never gotten a chance before finally got to shine. This kid, Marcus, who'd been relegated to the 4 p.m. slot the previous year, did this incredible beatbox routine that brought the house down. The Graham twins played their violin duet with actual working mics and sounded like professionals. Even kids whose parents had been part of the problem seemed relieved that everything was finally fair. 6 months after the whole scandal, the state education department released a report showing our school's test scores had jumped 15% and attendance was up to 96% from 88% the year before. The interim principal held a meeting where she said the improvement came from families trusting the school again and kids feeling like they actually mattered. Teachers reported that classroom behavior was better and parent participation at conferences had nearly doubled. It turned out that when people felt the system was fair, they actually wanted to be part of it. The state legislature started hearings about school fundraising transparency and invited several of us to testify. Tanner spoke for 20 minutes about how kids could tell when things weren't fair, even if adults pretended everything was fine. His testimony went viral and within a month the legislature passed a bill requiring all school-related fundraising to be completely transparent with public reporting of where every dollar went. The media started calling it Tanner's Law, which made him turn red every time someone mentioned it at the school. He kept saying he was just one of 43 kids who'd worked together, but the name stuck anyway. Mr. Kim used the whole situation as inspiration to create a peer mentoring program where kids helped each other regardless of who their parents were or how much money their families had. High school students taught middle schoolers instruments and middle schoolers helped elementary kids with music theory. The program got so popular that 3 other districts asked Mr. Kim to help them set up something similar. He started giving workshops on weekends about building community through music education. The tech company that originally donated the equipment was mortified when they found out what the Charlesons had done with it. They set up a new grant program specifically designed to prevent corruption with direct distribution to schools and oversight committees that included parents and students. They hired several parents from our district, including 2 who'd been shut out of the PTA, to help manage the program. Every piece of equipment got tagged and tracked to make sure it went to the kids who needed it. 9 months after everything started, Tanner got a letter from the mayor's office saying he was receiving a citizenship award for civic courage. Talk about karma serving up a full buffet. The Charlesons get probation while Tanner gets laws named after him. From courtroom star to accidental legislative icon, this kid turned middle school drama into actual state policy reform. The ceremony was at City Hall with all 43 kids from the original group invited to stand with him. When he gave his acceptance speech, he made sure to name every single kid who'd helped expose the corruption. The mayor said it was the first time in the city's history that kids had led the charge to fix adult corruption. Some families never forgave us for disrupting what they saw as the natural order of things, where money meant access and connections mattered more than fairness. We stopped getting invited to certain birthday parties and backyard barbecues. The country club crowd acted like we didn't exist when we ran into them around town, but we gained real friendships with people who actually shared our values about fairness and giving every kid a chance. Parents who'd felt shut out for years started including us in their lives, and we built a community based on something more than just whose kids went to which summer camps. The school board meeting that changed everything happened 3 months after the fire. I sat in the packed auditorium watching board members shift uncomfortably as parent after parent stood up demanding real change. The superintendent kept wiping sweat from his forehead while reading through a thick stack of proposals. That's when they announced the creation of a student representative position. Someone who'd sit with a board and make sure kids had a voice in decisions. The nomination process started immediately with teachers and parents submitting names. 2 weeks later, Tanner got the call that he'd been selected from over 50 nominees. He spent hours preparing for his first meeting, creating surveys for students about their biggest concerns, and organizing the responses into clear categories. The talent show got rescheduled for spring with completely new rules that everyone could see posted on the school website. No more premium packages or special slots for donors. Kids drew numbers from a while parent volunteers made sure every performer got the same quality equipment. Joey stepped onto that stage with a working microphone for the first time. His voice came through crystal clear as he sang the song he'd been practicing for 6 months. Kaylee got the 730 slot she'd earned through the random draw, and her gymnastics routine brought the whole audience to their feet. I stood in the back of the auditorium watching these kids finally get the fair chance they deserved and felt tears running down my face. Thanks for letting me tag along while we explored all these twists and turns. Way more fun sharing it with you. See you next time.